What's up, Patreon donors? Welcome to the first video for all of you that I am recording for all my legal tech growth Patreon donors. First of all, this goes without being said. First and foremost, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me. The idea behind this is really just to start to build up a larger, bigger community that really helps the legal tech community level up, specifically the legal tech startups. We know how hard it is to break into this space, and I'm trying to do what I can to add value in this way. To that extent, all of your support and your donorships are immensely valuable. I can't tell you how much, first of all, your confidence means, and second of all, the ability to basically do what I love more and more. So today, following up on my newsletter from earlier this week, we're talking about content marketing. So content marketing is something that many people are familiar with, but unfortunately, I think many people have it slightly wrong whenever it comes to how content marketing works today, especially whenever it comes to legal tech growth. If you read my last newsletter, you'll know that I talked about a mental model that I like to use called TOFU, MOFU, and BOFU, and it does not refer to that type of tofu. So tofu, mofu, bofu refers to top of funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel. So hopefully you can see my screen here. Today there's going to be two things that I want to talk about. The first is going to be we're going to get deep into the tactics on tofu, mofu, and bofu, and the kind of content that you should be serving up your prospects at every stage, with a particular focus on tofu. And then finally, I'm going to give you some tools that I use, some insider tools that I use to quickly source and figure out what tofu content is most important. So why are we doing this? Well, first of all, as Patreon donors, you get access into more technical, tactical, step-by-step analysis for most of the strategies that I put out as part of my newsletter. As the famous Sun Tzu, the philosopher, ancient Chinese philosopher, and author of The Art of War put it, the reality is that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. But tactics without strategy is noise before defeat. So as Patreon donors, you get the ability to kind of blend whatever strategy I think tends to be working with the tactics to make that entire flywheel go faster. And today we're going to talk about tofu, mofu, and bofu, and then more generally, content in general. So let's get to the first part of this, deep dive, which is actually getting a little bit more into the weeds on tofu, mofu, and bofu specifically. If you read my newsletter, you know that I think that tofu is probably the most important part of this entire funnel. The reason being that tofu, from a psychological standpoint, tofu really opens up the door and opens up the hearts and minds of your customers to really understand and take in your content as they go through the funnel. This is an issue of trust. This is an issue of likability. As your mom said, first impressions are everlasting. And tofu is really the emotional blanket that you put on the rest of your content as your prospects go through. So it's super, super important. So let's talk a little bit about the type of content that you should be putting out at Tofu, and then I'll talk a little bit about how that Tofu content should be structured how Tofu leads into the other structures of Mofu, middle of the funnel content, and Bofu, and what you should be putting out at points. So let's go ahead and get started with tofu. Okay. So tofu, not that type of tofu, is all about creating an emotional connection with your audience. What do I mean? Emotions basically drive decision making, and emotions, or what I like to call psychologic, really kind of bubble up into the rational front part of the brain analysis that comes along with mofu and tofu. So top of funnel is if it's all about grabbing attention, being liked, really making a connection with your audience. There's one thing that people love more than anything else, which is themselves. So this is really your opportunity to speak and speak about the problems that your prospect has and is thinking about on a day-to-day basis. More often than not, the reality is that the vast majority of people are probably not thinking about your solution space at the moment. If they did, they probably would have been actively finding you. This is 2020. It's not that hard. If you are actively looking to solve a problem and you have a website and at least pretty good bottom of the funnel, dialed in, keyword specific content, then you should be found. In other words, bottom of the funnel is really there not to get you attention. It's there to help them cross the line by getting over objections. So then that means what's the vast majority of people? The vast majority of people probably aren't even thinking about your problem at this point in time. In fact, it might not have become a problem in their lives, but that's still, if it still is somebody that you can help, you should still be marketing to them to try to introduce yourselves to them. Now, unfortunately, the mistake that I think most people make is that although they wouldn't do this in their real lives, most content tries to come up and within the first 5 seconds say, hey, this is what we do, this is how we solve it, and this is why we're better than our competitors. Now, if that content was a real life person and you met a random person on the street, you would think that that's the weirdest thing in the world, right? But unfortunately, we do it for a lot of incentive reasons because we're under the gun, etc. Tofu content is more like meeting somebody randomly at a party. The idea is to really say, hey, what are you interested in? Tell me a little bit about yourself. If you've ever read How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's all about asking them questions about themselves. But some reason we miss that and we get all confused. So tofu content is really about addressing and talking about people's personal problems. This is all about meeting them where they're at, understanding them as an ideal customer profile, and understand the reality is that if they are not actively looking for you at the moment, then the problem space that you solve is probably not on their mind. But you still want to talk to them. So figure out what are the problems that are on their mind on a day-to-day basis, so long as they're within your target audience. This includes personal problems. For example, today, all about COVID-19, remote work, et cetera, et cetera. Now, most people, I think, most legal tech companies get a little confused and they think that they can't speak with any authority to anything outside of their problem space. So if you are a contract review legal tech company, you might feel like you can't say anything except for efficiencies and contract review. Not true. Not true. You can totally talk and add value in a smart way with people who could be part of your target audience by simply curating content for them, giving your opinion, and then moreover, just trying to deliver value and meet people where they're at that top of the funnel. So top of funnel is really about personal problems. It's really about attaching yourselves to things that are in their world on a day-to-day basis. So a couple easy ways to think about this is mapping out people's personal problems. What is it that they struggle with on a day-to-day basis? Industry trends. So for example, bigger than your problem space, What is the industry trends that a certain person is living through on a day-to-day basis? Controversial opinions. Are there opinions floating around within that industry space that you can comment on one way or another, even if it's totally outside your problem space? So, for example, lawyers might be dealing with a lot of mental health issues that you might want to gravitate toward, and how law firms are dealing with it or not. You might be a contract review AI play, but you might still want to have a comment and an opinion on that one way or another, because that's what they're living through on a day-to-day basis. And finally, tools and insights. Again, it's about helping them do something completely outside of your space, just to get yourself noticed. Again, how to friends and influence people. You want to talk to people about themselves, and not you. Okay, so that's really tofu, and the switch here, the big insight here is ask questions about themselves and do everything possible not to talk about yourselves. In fact, a good way to talk about this is, I can't talk about anything within my practice space. That's almost a good mental model, or a good space to be in whenever you're thinking about the type of tofu content that you should be thinking. Now, you're going to push back against this, because you're going to say, well, if I got that attention, I should definitely tell them about myself. Wrong. People do not care what you know until they know that you care. Moreover, this is a quick way to quickly get swiped over, scrolled over, nobody paying attention to your content. Why? Frankly, people have tunnel vision, and the only things that they're technically thinking about is the goals that they have set for themselves, the image that they have contrived for themselves, and lastly, the problems that are on their to-do list today. Effectively, people don't have the bandwidth or the range to think through anything otherwise beyond that. Now, they might, of course, this is a black and white statement, but from a probability standpoint, you want to put yourself in the best position to get noticed, and also the best position to add value to people based on what they're thinking about today, not making them mentally switch to something else. By and large, people don't like to do that. So that's my top of funnel. That's my top of funnel insight. Put yourself in a box. Stop talking about your problem space. Those people who are thinking about your problem space should be finding you if you have good enough presence. When we're talking about tofu, what we're really talking about is reaching out to those people who aren't even thinking about you, but who you should be introducing yourself. Okay, now this video is not really about MoFu or BoFu, but I want to round this out before we get into the tools and tips, just to give you some context about how this content funnel works. So we went over tofu. Now let's talk about the middle of the funnel, or MoFu. MoFu is all about giving them the idea that there might be a new way to solve some of their problems that they might be dealing with today. I like to think about this as strategy more so than tactics. And what you're really doing is you're talking about the bedrock and the strategy and the shift in mindset that your prospects might want to get educated about. So this is not the time to be talking about your solution. This is not the time to be talking about the features and benefits. This is not the time to be talking about social proof. This is not the time to be talking about case studies. That is bottom of the funnel content, right? This is the time to be tickling them with the idea that there might be a new, easier, better, simpler strategy to explore within the context of the problem space that they might be dealing with. So for example, again, let's stick with the corporate the contract review space. You might start to just talk about automation in terms of some specific type of contracts, rather than talking about the special way that you do it, or how your system or platform makes it easier than your competitors, let's say. So again, if you're talking about automation, you're really comparing automation against the ways that they are currently doing it today, which might be hand reviewing it, or inversely, you might be talking a little bit about the pains that they are going through with regard to how they're doing it today. Again, what you're doing is, if top of the funnel was all about just getting them to like you, the next is, after they like you, asking a little bit about how they're currently doing things on a day-to-day basis, right? Again, think about your prospects as real people that you meet at a networking event. If this was positioned, you might get into, this might be the point in time where somebody that you've gotten into a conversation after about 10 or 15 minutes, and you get into a certain topic of conversation that you have some insight on. You're not going to run in and quickly say, well, this is what I do and this is why you should buy it. Instead, you would broadly talk about the space and really just say, oh, I've heard X, Y, and Z things about this. Can you give me your opinion on it? Again, this is exploration, really. So middle of the funnel is really about new versus old way, giving them insights into a particular problem space. You might be giving them mental models that might be interesting that you've heard. Really, it is kind of bringing the full weight of your knowledge from a high level strategic standpoint. And you're also maybe trying to show yourself as an influencer in this space, that you've thought about this space deeply. And finally, let's talk about BOFU. So bottom of the funnel. This is where, unfortunately, 100% of most content lives today, even though it's ill-mapped and actually represents the smallest portion of what your content should actually be dedicated. So there's a total mismatch, it seems like. Right now, if this funnel is working, BOFU should be at the bottom here and really should represent, in terms of size, really should represent a very small part of your content. Unfortunately, it seems like the content is switched and the triangle is inverted, where a very small amount of the content is actually top of funnel, and a very large part of it seems to be all about bottom of the funnel. So this is completely backwards, and I think this is why people see how bad the click-through rates are and the engagement rates are with most of their content. So most of you know what to do whenever it comes to bottom of the funnel. The big insight that I want to take is that your production content needs to go from inverted top upside down funnel. If this looks like a funnel, think about an inverse triangle, basically. Right now you're talking way too much about bottom of the funnel when it really should be this way, which is the vast majority of the funnel of the content should be top of funnel and middle of the funnel. Why? Because think about intent. At the point of bottom of the funnel, where they're on your website, where they're clicking through on your page, they've really gone through already TOFU and MOFU, and they're already in the point of basically compares and contrast. So great content in the space is social proof, case studies, benefits and features, and competitor analysis. What you're really trying to get over is the last mile problem and the objections. But I won't go into that a little more. That's an entire space that I don't want to get into. But certainly BOFU, there is a psychological way to really think about the type of content that you want to be putting out at that bottom of the funnel. And I'm going to do a piece on that. But if you want to start to get into this, read this book called Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And that book summarizes 6 persuasion principles that can basically be injected into your bottom of the funnel content to really help you get over that last mile objection. Okay, so that kind of summarizes the first part of this content. Now let's go, first part of this deep dive. The second thing that I want to go through now is how to quickly source that content using some of today's tools. So specifically, I'm going to go through four types of tools. The first is free tools, and the most basic which will be something like a Google search and Google search results. The second will be a derivative on that on Google search, something called Ask the Public, which I've used in the past. The third will be social media platforms. Social media platforms, of course, are just giant social experiments in terms of what is popular and what is not. And I'm going to show you how to use social media platforms like LinkedIn to really dial in on tofu content. And finally, I'm going to show you some very cool, very powerful paid tools that you can use like BuzzSumo or SparkToro to really accelerate this. And this is for people who are putting out a lot of content, which you should be doing at the top of the funnel. So let's go into the first one. This probably goes without being said, but your first best most powerful tool is really Google search. So Google search has two factors, I think, three factors really that you want to consider. So the first is the search bar. So the search bar has a gold mine of insights here. So for example, let's take the tofu, mofu, bofu today. If you were learning about tofu, mofu, bofu, which is where you'd really be where you might be let's say in a top of funnel, or you wanted to learn, let's say, easier about content marketing, let's say, you can see here that what is suggested tends to be this autofill, which is telling you exactly what people are searching for at this point in the funnel. Now, tofu, mofu, bofu, and content marketing are both strategies, so they're more designed around middle of the funnel, but it can map to top of the funnel as well. Let's say somebody ran across something on their social media channel. That might still be a tofu intent. Maybe something better might be something like lawyers merger and acquisitions. You know, right here, that lawyer is really searching for stuff relevant to themselves, right? Their problem space, let's say, things that they're thinking about. So the first thing that I want to point out to you is if you know the top of funnel problem space, Google is a great first resource to go to, specifically first this Google autofill, which shows you really the intent. The next thing that I want to show you is obviously the content, but let's look at content in a little bit of a different way rather than just content. So this is called SERP, Search Engine Results Page, and the Search Engine Results page as an actual asset has a lot of interesting insights. So for example, obviously everybody knows that things that follow up on the first page tend to be some of the most popular. But of course, then there's an entire SEO aspect to that in terms of who ranks for what. But by and large, you know, Google is effectively trying to give you, with its algorithm, is trying to give you the content that you need because they want to stay the best search engine company, and obviously they want to be serving you ads. So they're working really, really hard to basically make sure that the content that you see within the first 5 seconds is highly relevant. But there's two things here that I want to kind of double click on whenever it comes to top of content funnel. The first is take a look at the actual subject lines of these articles. There is a gold mine to really pull out here, especially for top of funnel stuff, or once you know your top of funnel stuff. the way that you can phrase things and the way that people are responding to things based on the subject lines of these articles. Don't sleep on this. This is very cool, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. If you can see kind of a pattern within the actual subject lines, you should definitely be titling and subjecting your content to pretty much map to this. So that's the first thing. Take a look at the subject lines and get a feel for the tone. So for example, everybody knows how to settle blank, blank, blank is an incredible subject line. So don't go over that. And sentiment is super important. The second is this squib right here, which is sometimes called a few different things, but basically the search preview is also very important. People are reading this, and similar to the subject line, you can glean out a lot of important information as to where these things are ranking relative to what they are promising people as a hook to get them to click. So that's also very important. And finally, obviously be using the search related to functions. This is simply a gold mine of tangentially related topics that people might be looking for that could expand your top of funnel. And remember, top of funnel is really an inverted triangle, and that's where most of your content should really be dedicated. Okay, so that's Google, and now I want to move us into the next, which is related to this idea of related search terms. I want to move us into Ask the Public. Ask the Public is, I think, a freemium site that basically takes this idea of drawing insights from search engine result pages, from previews, from similar asked, as well as Google Preview. So basically, they've taken the exact strategy that I just spoke to on Google, and they've just made it into an easier user experience. And so in this case, they've taken all of that and they have given you kind of a cool plot breakdown, brain tree, basically, of a bunch of related content that might come to something like a keyword. So for example, in this case, I searched for corporate lawyer, and what Ask the Public does is it comes back and it gives you a who, what, which, where, why, and how of search results based on a bunch of different search engine results that they aggregate for you. What I like to use this for is just, I start with a keyword, a top of funnel keyword, and I kind of, it does two things for me. One, it helps me visualize exactly all of the different permutations and the different topics that people might be talking about within that. And it also gives me subject lines, subject headers to use that I might be able to talk to. So this is the first, and then there's a double click on this. I'm not actually sure what's the difference between these two, but anyway, play around with this. Again, this is kind of just a next step, ladder up, more advanced version of Google search results. But I tend to find pretty good ideas whenever I use this. Okay, so that's Google search and Ask the Public. Now let's go into the last two, which is social media platforms and BuzzSumo. So if you're not familiar, most social media platforms are not only for taking in content, but also for figuring out the type of content that people are responding to, of course. Now, you know that based on the feed, but the feed is not always the best indication, and your personal feed, of course, is just one data point. Next, that's why you kind of got to go next level and take a look at aggregating social media intent and clicks for your top of funnel topic. And a really good place to start here, most social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as Twitter, and then some microsites, micro platforms also allow you to do this. Let's take, for example, LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is awesome. And if you don't know this, LinkedIn allows you to take a look at their content by basically going to your company page and then doing a search for your company within your company page for content. So here I'm on the Nexel company page, and I go into content, and I did a search specifically for all LinkedIn members, law practice, as well as partner. And what this came back and told me from a content perspective was that over the last 15 days, the following content has basically been trending for partners at law practices. In other words, this is what they click on within their feed. It also gives me the engagement level rate in terms of, which is obviously how many people saw it divided by how many people clicked on it. And it's just a really cool, powerful way to kind of build up sentiment in terms of top of funnel stuff. So you might want to use this, and social media has a much more interesting dynamic because it tends to be very top of funnel oriented. Why? Because mostly people are only going to click. Think about the fact that most people look at social media whenever they want to be engaged. And also it tends to be in very small little bursts of 3 to 5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes. So the only things that are going to attract their interest tend to be things that are immediately relevant. Again, top of mind. This is why most companies really do a sandwich strategy between bottom of the funnel remarketing on social media platforms and top of funnel broad marketing to try to basically capture those two intents at the same time. Top of funnel, which is grab their attention. Bottom of the funnel is remarket them if they've come on any of your other sites, because theoretically they're further down the funnel. So this is just an asset and a resource that you want to be leveraging specifically in your top of funnel, because it really does, again, show high intent and what is really on people's day-to-day sort of thought processes. Which gets us, and I'm going to start wrapping this up, which gets us to two powerful paid tools that you can use. So the first is called BuzzSumo. BuzzSumo, again, takes this idea of aggregating content from social media clicks and kind of just blows it up. It really does an incredible job of giving you some broad analytics as to what is trending at any point in period of time across both the web, Facebook, YouTube, and then some other stuff in terms of backlinks if you're into SEO. What this does, again, let's stick with the corporate lawyer example. What this does is you put in corporate lawyer, and it'll effectively track over a long period of time the total clicks and the total engagement across different pieces of platform based on a certain piece of content here that's on the web. So that's very, very cool, and you can do a lot with it. Again, this is just kind of a stair-step ladder uptick from something like going to a bunch of these different platforms and trying to do it yourself. In other words, this is just companies that have aggregated this information and made it even simpler. And there's a lot of cool features and analytics that you can kind of cut and dice this data up with. Very interesting. And the last that I want to talk about is something called SparkToro. So SparkToro is a different cut on this. So instead of you telling, for example, in BuzzSumo's case, instead of you telling it a keyword and it kind of telling you what maps to that keyword across different platforms, SparkToro takes a different approach, which says, okay, tell me a little bit. It's more audience focused. So for example, let's kicking with the corporate law, instead of corporate lawyer as kind of like a search term, in this case, SparkToro gives you the ability, it's really all about this audience intelligence. In other words, getting into the mind of your actual audience. So you might, for example, put corporate, uses these keywords. Let's say, for example, uses these keywords in their profile, corporate lawyer. So it'll do a search, and basically what SparkToro does, which I think is very cool, is that it gives you a bunch of channels that these people who define themselves in this way, the channels that they basically are subscribed to. Now, this is great because problem number one is, what is the content? Problem number two is, where should you put the content? And SparkToro really almost takes both of these and combines them together. It gives you the amount of social accounts that are following certain social accounts that have this, let's say in this case, define themselves as corporate lawyers, the channels that they actually follow, the things that they are subscribed to. It's a lot. It'll tell you the websites visited, and basically it does a correlation between your audience and the stuff that they are following, sharing, liking, engaging with. So this is really more of a channel strategy. And when you layer in the content along with the channel strategy, you really have a playbook for going through where you should put the content, your tofu content, when you should put it there, and where it should actually go. So that was a lot of information. Hopefully some of it was super valuable. To summarize, today on this tactical breakdown, we went through, we did a deep dive on the type of content that you should be putting into Tofu, Mofu, and Bofu. And finally, we went through some tools that you can use to really scale out your Tofu content very quickly based on your audience or the type of things that they're clicking. And finally, I showed you a tool that tells you where you can actually start to put your stuff. In combination, I think that this is the type of thing that you need to, the type of idea that you want to think about. And what I really want to leave you with is, today, most content is way too bottom of the funnel. Most of it is just this iteration on your own product, on your own market space. And I want to think about telling you how to switch that and really make it more of a funnel where the vast majority of your time should really be capturing top of funnel sentiment. And this is going to feel hard because it feels like you're not talking about yourself, but it will lay the groundwork for all of those other people and really smooth that funnel. So I hope that this was valuable. I will be back next Saturday with another deep dive into another strategy based on what we spoke about in the newsletter. And I want to thank you all again for your support and your continued donations as a Legal Tech Growth patron. Thanks so much. Take care. I'll see you next week.